All right. Welcome to Legally Everywhere with Child What? We are legally everywhere. We are looking into everything. Okay. Got my good sweater on because I'm a little cold. But today, we're about to get into these receipts. I'm going to show y'all something that I was looking into. I said, listen, I'm going to walk you through something real time that's been happening, right? So, there were 3,000 protest events, right? One place said 3,000, another place said 3,200, right? That's a difference of 200. That's a big difference to me. But we're going to just say it's over 3,000 protest events that were reported across the United States yesterday at the No King or No Kings event, right? And that made me interested and very curious about those jurisdictions. Like, I was very curious if there was like ICE agreements, right? They had those MOUs. Because if you've been following the content yesterday, we were able to do the Project 25 review from outwards, from global to domestic impact, and how certain things were indexed inside of Project 25. And since I was already looking at that content, I decided to dive a little bit deeper. I thought it'd be very interesting, very significant to do. Let me pull up my screen so that we can go ahead and actually see the chart that I made first. I went ahead and made it as a PowerPoint to make it easier. Sometimes when I put stuff up on the screen, y'all don't always see it. So I want to make sure, yes, okay, boom, alignment. Okay, so I want y'all to be able to see what we have going on here. Okay, so as you can see, there's an actual official recording, right? This was on Reuters article, so I went ahead and put that one up as a little bit of a higher authority as opposed to some of like our local news, but all of them still count. Y'all know how I feel about how we review receipts. This is the general framework. We look at historical things, strategic actors, legal authority, meditation perspective, mediation rather, perspective, global political context, power dynamics. That's generally the lens for which we look at things. So today, once again, I'm showing you, make sure the screen is on here because sometimes it goes black on me. Okay, we're still good. When you look, you can see this was recorded. This is actually a screenshot that I took from Don Lemon's account. He showed these different locations where the No Kings protests, let's say peaceful protests, were being held, right? So we know that there were roughly over 3,000 events that were reported, right? I did not pull data and do a data analysis on 300, but you got 3,000 places. What I was able to do was I was able to go and look at publicly accessible information, right? So like it was listed in Reuters, right? And then there's local news, right? And I was able to go from local news articles and see how many different maybe cities or counties they index within their respective places to see how many, or better yet, what index where these places were, so we could try to pull some data. This is not going to be all exhaustive, so do not feel like what I'm putting up within a 24-hour period would be all exhaustive, but this is what I found as far, and it's quite significant at this point, right? The articles or the information that I pulled, I wanted to make sure, one, what is publicly accessible, because I always told you my information be publicly accessible. Two, it was verifiable. I could go check and say, okay, they said it was here. To some degree, there's some information supporting that it was there. So whether it was an official meetup, something that's public information, not anything that could be private, wouldn't want to do anything odd that way. And also, I wanted to wait until at least the 24-hour period had expired. So hopefully that everyone who went out and engaged in those activities are safely home. We want to make sure we're doing some safekeeping there, some best practices there. So I wanted to give it the full 24-hour period. Some of this information was posted ahead of time because obviously people are meeting up there. But we wanted to make sure everyone is safely home and that we're able to do this data and not feel like it's putting anyone in any kind of situations, right? So like y'all like, girl, get to these receipts. Listen, this is the event right here. So you can see this is Minneapolis, this is Washington, D.C., this is Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, City, San Diego, Boston, right? So we see there's a wide variety of places. Okay. So just so you can see, I was able, based off of the metrics that I kind of gave you, and I have a few more. I'm going to look back and forth with my notes, make sure I'm giving y'all as much tea as I possibly can without overcomplicating or making it super long. Consider this more like a snapshot. I want this to be encouraging. I want people to kind of think about some of the other optics that could be in play, some of the other things that could be happening at the same time. I'm not saying causation. I'm not going to say motive. What I'm going to say is I found it interesting, right? And I started off with a hypothesis, as most people do, right? I was very curious about how much overlap would be. I was curious if there was overlap, better yet, right? I wanted to know how many places that had no king protests had MOUs in that city or reasonably within that reasonable jurisdiction, right? That's really interesting information. It'll also be very relevant information. ICE is something that's associated very strongly with the executive, right? And being very pro some of the things that have been happening throughout the United States. This particular protest is in protest of certain kinds of things. Now, specifically with the focus of ICE, right? Which is immigration elements, right? That is for what I'm looking at with regards to the MOUs, just so that we're clarifying and that I'm putting out as many disclaimers as I possibly can. But I don't want people to say I'm misrepresenting the data or putting angles that aren't necessarily there. However, what have I always said? We want to look at all patterns. We want to look at all angles, look at all information. So without putting too much on, I'm not going to put 20 on 10, but just making sure we're actually looking at it in a very fair and reasonable way. You're going to be shocked by what? The fact that I found 31 overlaps. I found 31 overlaps. There were over 3,000, right, events that occurred yesterday. I was able to identify 173. I think that's a relatively good sample size, right? Out of what was accessible to me within a 24-hour period, what that could be verified, that was listed, right? Of 173 locations, I was able to identify that 31 of them had overlaps with memorandums of agreement. Not an understanding saying we might work together, but memorandums of agreement. That's a handshake. We have a deal. What I will also tell you as another side note, but let's stick with this part. 21 of those, the actual no king protest was actually directly in the city that had the agreement. So let's say, for instance, the case study we used yesterday, if you watched that video, was Michigan. And I so happened to look up Taylor because someone sent me information about Taylor. The no king protest was in Taylor Police Department, which means that city physically had a memorandum of agreement, and it was established what? In 2025. Most of these overlaps actually had agreements that were established in 2025 or 2026, which is very interesting because some agreements go all the way back to like 2020, right? So with that being said, out of 173 locations analyzed, 31 had overlaps, which is roughly about 17.9%. Let's just go 18, right? We're looking at is literally 18%. We want to be technical, 17.9, right? But that's about 18%. When you think about rounding, that's like almost like 20% of what I was able to pull, which sounds a little bit larger than not, right? It's not like, oh my goodness, but it's something to make you go, right? 21 were directly that direct city. I told you I would do an expansion, and that expansion reached out to the county for which that city was associated. Because more than likely, if you're thinking about it from this perspective, if they're known for capture or detainment, right? They're detaining. They have to go somewhere. There is a list on their website when I say their website, I mean the ICE website, as to where these detention facilities are, right? But I generally, when I think of detention, I'm like, okay, well, outside just the detention facility that might be specifically related to ICE. Sorry, I think there's something on my lips. Okay. I was curious if there were like maybe not police departments, but like jails, right? Which might be held in your county. So that made me think to expand it just a little bit further. Additionally, just because it's not in your immediate city doesn't mean it's not in your general area. So I did push it out to the county. I'll do a phase 2 of all of this where I'm going to dig a little bit deeper, but that'll be at another time. For right now, I just want you to know that's pretty significant, right? And I also want you to think, if I start off with 21 directly in the city, like your city that you're holding this in directly has a relationship with ICE. When I expanded out to the county, that did an expansion at 47.6%, right? We almost doubled the number of places that had this additional level of, like, let's say, exposure, right? So just key metrics right there. I already kind of gave that to you. Let's see. I put it in a visual form because I told y'all, like, y'all know how I am. I'm very visual. I like a graph. I like maps. I love all of that. It's just like one of my favorite parts when I'm doing this kind of stuff is to do that. So I do have that embedded for you. Once again, I wanted to explain the methodology. I kind of set this up somewhere like a research paper inadvertently, but I also wanted to make sure it was super, super accessible. So I wanted to explain, to understand exactly what I did, how I did it, why I did it, so that one, there's this high level of transparency, and anything that I felt like possibly might need a disclaimer, I put that in there. In my youth, I did do research and I was a research assistant, so that's why it has this presentation. But I just wanted to make sure that people could be informed and people had information. So I'm giving you these receipts. I'm getting into these receipts real time with y'all. So y'all can have this information. Y'all can have this as early as Monday. So if you're doing some things and y'all socialize and talk about stuff or coordinating other things, you have this as information that you can reference and index. Okay. So when we talk about the methodology, when I say the word direct, right? Because I gave you information to direct and county, you're like, okay, wait a minute. What was my process method, right? Direct means the same exact city within the same exact state. So they said from our case study yesterday, the city was Taylor, but there's cities called Taylor throughout the United States. We need Taylor, Michigan. Okay, so that's a direct connection. When I say county, I mean the county that city is located directly in, right? Not the same county name, but it's a different state. You'd be like, oh, that seems explanatory. Not necessarily. When you deal with numbers and data research, you're trying to present this kind of information, you have to be very specific. So I'm letting you know what those specifiers were that I use. I had to often go in and make sure there's no duplications because sometimes that happens. It does happen, and I wanted to make sure I extracted all that out. Public data only. So there was some additional information I was able to come across. It was not public information, so that information was excluded from what I did analysis and review from, right? I said that I give you guys public accessible information that you could go on your computer, your phone, your tablet, your whatever, and you could find everything that I'm saying comfortably, right? And if there's some areas of discomfort, I always articulate what those are for you, right? If there's pressure points, I'm explaining those to you. And then if you send me a message or, put something in the comments, I will do a video to follow up to alleviate whatever stress I can with that process, right? I'll break it back down some more if needed. At this particular point, that's like the methodology, right? In more basic ways. So this is what it looks like, right? Of all the data that I had, right? And we talking about what? Over 3,000, right? Right here. We didn't see a match, right? So we're not saying every situation. We're not saying every situation. Most of them didn't have a match. But there were some matches, right? We saw a direct match. And then when we expanded out, we had some more. And that's where we fall right here. Okay? Match comparison, show it to you this way. You have your direct, and then you have your add-on with the county. Matter of fact, look like my chart did something weird at the top one. So I'm just going to tell y'all disregard that one. Well, no. Metric-wise, it came out correct. It came out correct. Y'all know me. I'm always looking at my numbers. I'm like, wait a minute. This is just a simpler design. My brain registered a little quicker. So I'm like, wait a minute. I had a couple variations of some of my charts, just so y'all know. I wanted to give the easiest formats possible. And I comb through quite often, so I wanted to make sure I got the right one. That's, in fact, the correct one. So now that we're looking at the match comparison, the match comparison shows what? How many? 20. We see when you take a bar chart, right? So we go directly to direct. We match it up to 20 direct. We go to county, and we see if this lines up to 10. That gives us what? Roughly 30. We know it's supposed to be 31. But if you can see that little tip right there, that's the one, right? So this is a representation, right? So we know this is 21 because we looked at the raw number, right? This is 21. This is exactly at the 10. This is everything else, right? Or better yet, for the total. This is your total at, you see how this is 30 and it's slightly above. So this is 31. Next time I'm going to add the number to it too, just to make it a little easier in comparison. So as you can see, that expansion effect, right? We went from here to that. So that's actually pretty significant. When we looked at the grand scheme, sometimes we're like, okay, that ain't that big of a deal. Okay, when you look at it from this perspective, that expansion is quite significant. Is it not? Okay. So once again, the direct was 21. Make sure all my notes are here. Is there anything else I wanted to kind of show y'all? Because we almost done. Aren't y'all excited about this good old data? Right? So 21 directly matched to MOUs. We had, when you expand it out to see what about the surrounding area, that county that it's associated with, there was an extra 10, which put us a total of 31, which means there was no overlap for 172 of what I was able to do an analysis on. What I did an analysis on is not the full 3,000. It was the sample size that I have, which is the information that was accessible to me, that's accessible to the general public, right? And met the metrics of what being verifiable in the public. Okay? Within the 24-hour period for which all this just happened. Okay? I also did a direct analysis, which I didn't add in the methodology, but I'm explaining here. When we say, how did I compare the MOAs? Okay, so I went onto ICE's, I hate the way that sounds, but I went onto the ICE website, and I pulled their participating agency document, right? I pulled that PDF, and I was able to use that as a template to map up against the cities and states that I was able to verify. And that's how I came up with this data. That would be critical information for you to know if you were to try to do this on your own. Okay, so you did get the geographical overlap. You're able to see that when it comes to this information, which I thought was pretty significant. I think it's significant that the MOAs existed in so many of those places. Even like, oh, 20 is not that much. 20 is still 20, right? I don't want to make any causality type of claims. Like, I don't want to say because this happened, this is causation, right? I don't want to do that because it's not my position to do or my place to do at this particular juncture. What I will say is patterns are patterns. I find it very interesting information. And when you're coordinating these kind of events, keep things like this in mind, right? Keep things like this in mind. We live in a very interesting time. We've seen a lot of interesting things relevant to freedom of speech. We talked about how freedom of speech is indexed in Project 25. We've seen how some of the executive orders have been written out relevant to freedom of speech. We've seen the actions, right? We've seen what people write, what people say, what they recommend. We also see the actual action, right? So when planning certain kinds of events, I just always say, try to be cognizant of as many factors as you can for the safety of everyone that is there. Luckily, I've not heard anything that gives me pause, but I just wanted to make sure that, as I do this kind of work, as I share these perspectives, thoughts that I might have, things I look in, things I'm like, ooh, I'm biting all into this. This is delicious. It's delectable. There are various ways that we can go about advocacy. This is just one way that I do it, that I try to support the overall community, just by sharing viewpoints and information that I come across, right? I also think transparency is the utmost. What are the limitations to what I presented, right? I can't present causation and causality because I can't really do that at this present juncture, right? Nor would I. But I'm able to show patterns. I'm able to show that some things exist at the same time. Sometimes certain things are in the same room at the same time, right? We talked about power dynamics. Who's in the room, who's not in the room. Okay. Limitations. This is not a full data set, right? I did not get 3,000 locations and get to map them to see how much more overlap we could find, right? I wasn't able to do that. But what we saw was still relatively significant, relevant to the sample size that I did have and that I could collect, right? It's public data only, right? I'm very intentional about only giving you publicly accessible information, public data only, but that also is inherently a limitation because often when you are in certain advocacy circles, when you are engaged in protests, rallies, those types of, a lot of what you do is somewhat removed from public domain until it needs to immediately be put certain places. So certain information isn't going to be sitting overly outside, until after the fact. Another reason why I wanted to make sure for safety reasons that 24 hours had passed. And additionally, I wasn't just putting any old thing out here, right? Everything I read was very peaceful. And we want to make sure we keep all that there, right? But more importantly, I just wanted to make sure we did see there was quite a bit of overlapping that occurred, right? Like roughly 1 in 5, right? Because it was close to about 20%. So that's like 1 in 5. County expansion definitely mattered in that conversation. But it's not in my city. We didn't Did your neighboring city approve it? Did they approve it? You know what I'm saying? Like maybe your city did not approve it. Did your neighboring city approve it? If I was to go show you the ICE list, matter of fact, I think I might do that for a quick second, right? You would be very, very shocked that how many agreements actually exist, right? We saw that number and it doesn't feel like, oh, that's not that big a deal. Okay, well, we scroll through it and we look at one of them, maybe then it would feel a little bit more impactful. And it's all public, accessible information. Like I said in my video yesterday, it does look like that website got a little facelift, but because we already been into these receipts, we've been getting into these receipts for a minute. My first video dive in occurred in June of last year, relevant to some events that occurred here in Michigan. And I kind of just done updates here and there. All this information is accessible on the page, right? There's a little bit of facelift. The content still looks the same, right? Some things are not as accessible, right? But for the most part, the content pretty much reads the same. But you almost want to have the buzz terms, right? Buzzwords. Because I'm giving you the language, you know what to look up, right? You know to put participating, agencies, to look up MOAs, right? The time frame, look up. And I'm going to actually show you what one of them looks like since we might have a few more minutes here, right? Just for the sake of conversation, right? From what I could pull, 1 in 5 overlap. I don't want to pull it out of distortion, right? So we have to keep in mind that it's 1 in 5 had an overlap out of the 173 that I was able to extract that was public, that was accessible, that could be verified. And what was interesting, the number almost doubled when we did county expansion. So when you say, oh, it's not me and my friends, but it could be your neighbors, and that's still your community. So reasonably so, you'd be surprised how many places are really connected to you, your family, your loved ones, or just, in general, the people, right? There are lots of patterns that can be observed when we look. So I'm going to show y'all what my report looked like when I first did it. And I was like, let me bust this down to like a PowerPoint presentation to make it a little bit easier. Right. So just so you know, if you go look through these MOAs, you'll see that there were a lot in Texas, a lot in Florida, a lot in Pennsylvania. There are actually, if you go look, you'll see that it'll surprise you what places actually have such high levels of contact. Okay, so we've been on here about 30 minutes. Let me see if I can just give y'all. I just want y'all to see it for yourself, right? I want you to see Alabama, right? Arkansas. You like, oh, and keep in mind they have different types of programs, right? They have the warrant-based one, then they have the task force, right? There's actually 3 different programs that they have that they're marketing. So look at this. Florida's going to be very long. From the county, so this is, right? So if you look here, they had them double. So when I talked about duplicates, you see how they have this particular county, like the sheriff county. They had them both as a task force and a warrant. Let's go here, make this easier. Right? You see that? Now, what is this? This is the day that those MOAs were signed in. We'll click into one and make sure y'all can see. Okay, thank goodness. I know sometimes the system gets a little choppy. But you see, these are agreements, right? In this particular place, they were signed in 2025. But not all of them. You'll look and you'll see some that have better yet, let me see. We'll find some where they have 2019 on them. So see how this one says 21? I'm sorry, it says 2020. Right? So some of them are older contracts. When you go on the website, just so you're aware, a lot of the contracts, if you find an MOA, and you look in the archive area, or you just kind of on there looking, if you're trying to look it up directly without digging into the way I kind of explained to look for it, what will pop up are agreements from 2020 and 21. You won't see these newer agreements, which you can see exist in a high level of representation, right? It presents abundantly. So those are the dates. We will click the link. So this one apparently is brand new in Baldwin County, right? As I explained to you, I pulled this data. This data is relevant as of March 27, 2026. It was updated according to ICE around 1 p.m., right? So 1400 hour roughly. I think it was like 1:30ish or 1. I have to go look back at the website, right? I have the links to all of those by way of this document, which you can have yourself as well. So let's look. Oh, see that 2019. There we go. Baker County. So let's go ahead and look this way. Where is that? That's in Florida. So we can just from that verifiable right there in Florida, they have had contracts with them relevant to ICE from 2019 all the way till present, right? Also, we know that Florida is a bordering state, so it's not that doesn't make sense logically, but it's just additional information to look into. I don't try to ever assume malicious motive or try to imply causation. But what we will do is we're going to monitor patterns. And when we see something, we're going to address it. Sounds fair? All right. You see, Florida has a lot going on. All Florida. Still Florida. Okay, so we go into Georgia. That's a pretty fair amount to cover the whole entire page. Guam. Right? Indiana. Keep in mind, this covers everything. So some of the other territories as well. So Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland. Had less. You have Massachusetts appeared to only have that one. But then you look at Michigan. Now, what did I show y'all yesterday? That Michigan, in fact, had a location, had a No Kings protest in what? Taylor, Michigan. But the Taylor Police Department, municipality, right? The community, they had the task force one, right? Let's go up. That's not correct. Here we go. Police department. He didn't even want to tell the county. I don't even understand why they didn't do that, but okay. Right? Last year, roughly around this time last year, right? So April of last year. Close to the end, closer to May. But like, we see that right there, right? I'm going to come back to this one, and since we did the case study before, but I'm gonna just show you some more of these, right? Michigan, Mississippi. Look how much is going in Mississippi. Missouri, Nebraska, Nevada, New York, North Carolina, North Dakota. What? They got the islands on here, right? Ohio. I looked at the website and found that the Michigan location was servicing both Michigan and Ohio. There's a lot going on. That's a lot of territory given all these locations is right there. But based off Michigan's placement, to a degree, it's also a bordering state, right? Border to Canada. I find it also interesting that the office is located in Detroit, Michigan. If you're familiar with geography, you would know that that downtown Detroit area is like right next to Canada like this. You literally can go straight to Canada. It's interesting placement, right? And posture. We don't assume causality ever. It's just, you just pay attention to the patterns of where things are placed, right? So once again, we're going to look through this a little bit more. I'm going to move a little quicker, right? So Tennessee, we saw North Carolina, Tennessee, Texas is going to be real big. Y'all ready? Texas is a big state though, right? So that makes a little bit more sense because it's such a big place, right? Geographically speaking, it's a larger placement. Okay? But you see, there's a lot, right? We just go a few pages. You had Utah, Virginia, West Virginia, Wisconsin, Wyoming, right? So I said, let's go to Michigan, right? Because I said we were going to go back to the case study, right? Let's go to, where is it going? My hand's moving quicker than, okay. So we here, we looked at that one. We're going to take that and I'm going to pop out and come back in, okay? Okay, so y'all can see this right here, right? Let's zoom in. They just got a little clicking because now they have this little fill-in, this fillable document. So it says the City of Troy, Michigan, Police Department, right? Yeah, tell me I'm not getting to these receipts. Tell me I'm not getting into these receipts. Okay, so we can see the actual agreement for them right here. So for the sake of this conversation, I'm just go ahead and highlight This is not official document as in I'm messing up anything in their system. So we're okay. Obviously, if it's official documents and that was going to be retained, I wouldn't be highlighting all over it. But for the purpose of us reading and looking through, oh yeah, the authority, right? So under the Immigration of Nationality Act, right? Codified. Authorized by the Secretary of Homeland. Right? Okay, they got certain policies, right? What's the training and assignments? Okay. So that says that they're personnel who are nominated, trained, certified, and authorized. Okay. Pretty standard information. Designation of authorized functions. Okay. What's going to get interesting, so stick with me, is we're going to see some signatures on here. Yes, we will. The power to serve and execute warrants of arrest. Power authority to administer oaths and take the and consider evidence. I really don't like the word alien, but we see what processing, including fingerprinting, photographs, interviewing, affidavits, right? Power and authority to prepare charging documents. Okay. Right? Record of deportable, inadmissible alien. So we'll put that there. Power and authority to take and maintain custody. What? To take and maintain custody. Or another state or local, so expedite. Let's see, the power to take and maintain custody of alien arrested pursuant to the law. Okay. So once again, to be detained, right? Take and maintain. Okay. Resolution of local charges. Because they're going to more than likely put it at that federal level is what that I'm interpreting that as. But what we get to the receipts another time, we'll read through everything. I won't do all that to y'all in the one. But the training, right? Tailored. And it'll be both in-person, online recording, and virtual formats. Okay, interesting. Let's see. Use of. Okay, well, this is very interesting based off the current events we've been seeing about the use of force and civil rights. Okay, but we also mentioned detention of aliens, public outreach and complaint procedures, right? Liabilities, cross-cultural issues. So it sounds good on paper, right? And we say sound good, a little being a little facetious, but that typically sounds standard, right? When we're reading this. Okay. We're going to move through, right? We're going to move through because we're not going to go read through every page out of this. Wait a minute. Okay, release of information, third parties, liabilities and responsibilities. Seem like something important to know. Federal tort, right? So that I talked about the Detroit office, right? So I said, okay, that's the Detroit office. Even though it was Taylor, it was Oakland County, they had to report to the Detroit field office. I let you know that the field office of Detroit, according to their website, also houses concerns or manages concerns relevant to Ohio. Let's see. Civil rights standards. Civil rights standards. So they'll provide some English with an interpreter. Okay. We're going to move down to where the signature would be. Because where does it go? What does it say? Chief of Police. Right? And we get a good old signature on this day, which should match the form that I showed you, right? That was from The agency itself, we see who was chief of police. That's something we probably could verify, right? So ICE themselves went ahead and completed this document within 5 days. So we see this says the 23rd of 2025. So this is April 2023, 2025. And ICE signed it on what? April 28, 2025. Okay. And we saw this is the acting director for the Homeland Security, right? We see this is relevant to ICE department. This is who we see right here, right? Points of contact. So then we get all their contact information, which is public information. Public information. Complaint procedures is right here. You were interested. Haven't said anything that would warrant immediate complaint, but as we see that this information is what made accessible, right? Resolution process, pretty standard, right? So out of curiosity, because I am a curious George, John. I'm just doing this police. I'm putting Taylor, Michigan, chief of police, and I'm just looking to see if that's the same name. Okie dokie. And we have a winner, what? Chicken dinner. What? So I put in Taylor, Michigan, chief of police. And whose name and image pops up, right? It says John Blair is the current chief of police for Taylor, Michigan, was appointed as the police chief of Taylor, Michigan in November 2017 after serving as an acting chief since July of 2017, being a long time member of the department since what? 1991. Right? And it seems like this person has a very extensive background, right? Special operations, traffic, firearm instructor, field training, SWAT, road patrol, right? They were involved in multiple disciplines or better yet, divisions within their department. Seems like they've been working there a very long time. No concern there, right? But what we're doing, we get into these receipts, we're researching everything I just presented to you, what we could verify that, right? We could look in and put what pieces of the puzzle together, right? So once again, I'm not trying to say causation. I'm not going to say this means that. What I'm going to say is we can see some established patterns. We can certainly see that out of 3,000 plus cases, right, I was able to get data for over 170 plus, and of that we were able to directly put a mapping and overlap with 31. 21 were directly in the cities that had or places that had memorandums of agreement. So with that being said, patterns do exist. And multiple things could be happening at the same time, but we also we're gonna be monitoring that. Well, and we're gonna be getting into these receipts, and we're gonna stay in these receipts. Why? Because that's certainly very interesting. That's very interesting. Of all the cities that we got, all the cities that we have here, it's very interesting that from what I was able to pull, 31 of them just so happen to be places that have MOUs. When the protest itself sits in opposition, and some of the areas for which people have been expressing concern and opposition actually connect to some of the activities associated, not all, but some of the activities associated with that particular program, right? So this is Adrian from Legally Everywhere. We Legally Everywhere looking into everything. I want to note that most locations do not overlap, right? And that's important. That's important to acknowledge, but the ones that do are not random. And that's important to recognize too, right? it's just such a peculiar thing that protest activities and enforcement agency agreements like all just so happen to be operating in the same jurisdiction at the same exact time. Relevant to the No Kings event. Okay. So I'm going to say one more thing before I fully sign off, and it's resources. As I always say, resources are only resources if you know how to use them. So that's why I spend the time to really get into these receipts and share with everybody so that this can be something we all can be looking into, and we all can share what we've been picking up and what we're reading into and what we're digesting and biting into, right? Because this does impact our overall community and it does impact the way that we absorb this, the impact, the way we internalize the situations for which we are all placed in, right? So it's very interesting information. As I always say, it's very interesting because we getting into these receipts. Baby, next time I come to say, y'all had so many good delectable receipts I just gave y'all today. I've been giving y'all consistent receipts all week. I might give myself a day off because I worked for y'all so good, right? I actually have a whole escalation live I wanted to do just about current events that happened in the last 48 hours, but we'll just index that for the next live. Y'all, this is Adrian from Legally Everywhere, where we are what, y'all? We looking into everything we learned today. So watch patterns, map patterns. I'll see you in the next video. Until next time.